what's up, YouTube fans? So on this video, I wanted to talk about the anthropic principle and some of the many applications of it, right? So basically, what the anthropic principle is often used to explain, right, is why, when it comes to the origin of life, right, we actually don't need to, come up with a scenario in which life will be something that comes about like often at all, right? It could be something that doesn't come about on the vast majority of planets. It could be something that only happens in a 1 in a trillion circumstance, right? Just so long as there's enough matter and energy out there in the cosmos that it could come about once, right? Because we don't actually know yet that there's any life out there anywhere aside from Earth. There may be, right? And if someone is trying to prove that there is life elsewhere in the universe, then there's a little bit more that they would have to explain, right? But for those that aren't trying to prove that life exists elsewhere in the universe, but only explain the life existing on Earth, right? Then we only have to explain it coming about once, right? Because also all life on Earth most likely traces back to one single common ancestor species, right? And there's possibly as much as trillions of planets in the universe. Our universe is possibly one out of only countless other universes, right? And so we don't actually need to come up with a scenario for in which we could say that life will be likely to come about on most planets. It could be something that's extremely remote circumstances, right? Where, this happens to occur in the right way by chance, and also this does, and also that does, and also that does, right? And just so long as there's enough planets out there for it to happen, that would be good enough, right? But what you might say, though, is you might say, wouldn't it be a crazy coincidence, though, that we would happen to find ourselves here of all places? That, if the vast majority of places out there in the universe, in the cosmos, don't have life, then wouldn't it be just like a crazy coincidence that we happen to find ourselves here of all places, right? But this is why, this is where the anthropic principle comes in, is that it actually wouldn't have to be a coincidence at all, right? Because, the fact that we find ourselves here, is only because we have the ability to observe the world around us. It's only because of our brain and sensory organs that we have awareness of the fact that we're on a planet with life, right? And our brain and sensory organs came about due to evolutionary processes which we would not expect to happen anywhere where there is no life, right? So therefore, with anywhere out there where there's no life, there's most likely nothing there with brain or sensory organs, and therefore nothing with awareness, right? Nothing with consciousness, and therefore most likely anywhere where there's no life, there's nothing there to observe the fact that there is no life there, right? And so therefore, it will be no surprise at all that we find ourselves here of all places, because anywhere where there is no life, there's most likely nothing there to observe the fact that there's no life, right? And furthermore, this a further application of the anthropic principle. So that's what we call the anthropic principle, that understanding that, most likely anywhere where like basically the anthropic principle says that anything where there's like it points out the bias that, anything that requires observers, anywhere where it happens, then like it basically says what I just explained, right? So in any event, a further application of the anthropic principle that you won't as often hear about necessarily per se, right, is that it may also be the case that in the very rare instances in which life does come about, it may be very rare instances, um, it may be even more rare for consciousness to evolve. It may be that even after even after life emerges, it may be the vast majority of the places out there where life comes about, consciousness may not come about in the vast majority of those places. Not necessarily, it maybe is often to come about, but while evolutionary processes would obviously help with the emergence of consciousness, it may be the case that, maybe the vast majority of places where life comes about, consciousness never comes about. But then based on the same logic, right, it will be no surprise that we find ourselves in one of the places where conscious, sensory organs and brain capable of consciousness did come about, right? Because anywhere where it didn't, there will be no one there to observe that it did, right? And then furthermore, it can even be further applied to the fact that we find ourselves here where there's creatures as intelligent as us humans, right? Which it may also be the case that the vast majority of planets which end up having consciousness never have anything as intelligent as us humans, right? But it would still not be a surprise that we find ourselves here of all places, right? Because even in places where there are creatures that are conscious, right, most conscious creatures would not have the intelligence to recognize that they're on a planet, recognize that life exists. Like, sure, they would see living things, but they wouldn't understand the concept of life, like growth and development, things like that. They wouldn't comprehend it, and they wouldn't comprehend it, like consider if they're on a planet with creatures that can do the types of things humans can do. They never would have even considered that. Even if they had seen humans, right, they wouldn't have the intelligence most likely to comprehend the significance of what humans are doing. To them, we would just be another thing in their environment, and they would only really become concerned most likely with, like, oh, are they going to try and eat me? And if not, they wouldn't really think much deeply into what we do or not, right? And so therefore, most species, even if they are conscious, they're not going to have awareness as to whether or not they're on a planet with life, whether or not they're on a planet with a technologically advanced civilization. They wouldn't even understand the concept of that at all, let alone ask themselves about that, let alone have the knowledge about things like that. Like certainly something like a worm, it has no idea about any of that. Even a dog probably wouldn't understand things like that, right? Or even a chimpanzee, right? And so it may even be that in the vast majority of planets in which consciousness emerges, you don't get things that are as intelligent as humans. That may, well, evolutionary processes would help. There may be also a number of chance events involved, right, that have to happen in the right way by chance, and it may not happen in the vast majority of planets, right, where consciousness even comes about. But it would still then not necessarily be a big surprise that we find ourselves here for the reasons that I explained, right? And there is also evidence towards thinking that, because consider the fact that on the planet Earth, we humans are the only creatures that are as intelligent as we are, with a complex civilization, with technology like we have. That's what we would predict would likely be the case if it is exactly as I said, that on most planets you don't get something as intelligent as us, even if you get consciousness. And not to mention that there were some somewhat chance evolutionary events involved with human evolution. The evolution of bipedalism is considered an unusual evolutionary change, right? So that would further support the notion that, only under like rare chance circumstances do you get creatures like us. And so it may be the case that most planets where consciousness evolves, you never get something as intelligent as humans, right? And so these are some of the many applications of the anthropic principle. And some people will like be all like really seriously, they'll like just like try and like that, they'll be like annoyed by the anthropic principle, and they won't want that to be the explanation. But I mean, when you think about it, it really makes very good logical sense, right? Like somewhere where there's no conscious observers, there's not going to be anything there to be aware of the fact that there is. And so simple as that, it actually makes pretty good logical sense. um so that's all for now. See you guys.